Καλησπέρα.
Hello everyone, I hope you can hear me all right. For those of you who don't know me, I am Eleni Tagor from HumanRights360 and I would like to welcome you to today's meeting. Our meeting is entitled Far-Right Extremism in Greece, Lessons from the Past, Challenges for the Future. This meeting is held on the occasion of a policy brief that has been drafted upon an initiative of my colleagues from the Change Initiative. So the whole the initial thought was to take stock of the lessons learned from our experience in Greece in terms of tackling far-right extremism. I would like to thank all those who were involved in drafting this briefing, either in the form of interviews or any other form. I must say that this has been a very highly productive process. It's something uncommon, and sometimes Greece is not always the best example. It has been invigorating seeing that something is happening. It has been very good to see what has happened over the past 10 years under a fresh, critical eye, see what we have achieved, what we could have done differently. Overall, this policy briefing is available on our website. Feel free to visit it. In Greece, this is something that can trigger conversation. So, no further ado, I'd like to launch this event saying that we start to keep an eye on what has happened in the past, what were our achievements, what we did wrong, and another eye is looking towards the future, trying to figure out how we're going to use those examples and lessons learned for the upcoming fights and battles. Before starting with the first panel, I would like to give the floor to Padraig Kirk from the Social Change Initiative. He will say a few words about this initiative. Padraig, you have the floor. Greetings from Greece.
Hi, Eleni, and greetings from Belfast. It's great to see everybody here today, even virtually. We're all getting used to that word. And it would have been lovely to be in Greece, but that time will come soon. I just wanted to say a few words about the Social Change Initiative, and then also to say why we think it's really important to learn the lessons from what we have experienced with Greek activists in defeating Golden Dawn. So SCI is an international NGO. We're based in Belfast, and our mission is to improve the effectiveness of activism for social change, and also to look and try to get support, try to get funders to support activism differently. In terms of our themes, our interests are peace building, migration, and protecting human rights and equality. And in relation to what we do, fundamentally, we are about supporting activists, and we provide convening space. We bring people together. We offer fellowships. We also provide support in terms of mentoring. And an important part of what we do is to bring together resources and learning around the activist experience. And today is really an example of that in relation to this report that we're producing jointly with HumanRights360. When I think back, actually, of our connection to Greece and to HumanRights360, it really stems to around 2016. And we've been closely working with Eleni and colleagues and other partners actually in France, Germany, Italy, and Ireland in order to support organizations to find ways to counter the very toxic public narrative that exists around migration. And I suppose it was in that context that we got to learn and hear more about the work that was being done in Greece in terms of trying to defeat Golden Dawn. To us, that felt like an untold story of success. And sometimes I think as activists, we're reluctant to think in those terms or to think of things in relation to success. And today's report is really us us, having looked back and reflecting on what I think is something that activists globally could really learn from. And I think that's a really important point about what this report tries to do, because there are many places around the world that are experiencing the same things that we're experiencing in Greece in relation to far-right extremism. And I think what we want to do is to provide Greece as an example for others who can look in to what has been learned and to then say, what can they do themselves about that? And that essentially is the context within which this report is set. We realize, of course, that it is always important to take stock. It's always important to learn from what we have been doing. And I think, as Eleni has said, an important part of the conversation today is also looking into the future. So what can we learn from what we have been doing? So what is the experience of our defeat of Golden Dawn for activists and activism? I have to say, we have been privileged to have been able to gather insights from activists in Greece, and we do hope that this report will be of benefit to you to think forward and also to our international activist community. I should just say, of course, that we recognize that the Greek journey in terms of defeating Golden Dawn and countering far-right extremism was not easy, and nor is it actually over. People were murdered, communities were threatened and intimidated, and people despaired about the failure of the state to protect the most vulnerable. The challenge of far-right and anti-democratic sentiments continue to pose a real threat, especially as we emerge from the global pandemic and all that comes with that. Economic hardship, deepening of inequality, and a continuing lack of trust in government and politics to make a difference to people's lives. At the end of the day, we set out in this report a few observations that we think we all need to be vigilant against and cognizant of. They apply to Greece and they apply to so many other places. The key lessons of learning, I think, are around the need for us to focus on the causes of inequality. We need to place more effort on exposing hidden influences between elites, oligarchs, politics, and business. And I think we also need to have an honest conversation about our past and how our institutions and our politics work. I'd like to thank HumanRights360 for all that they have been doing, all that they do, and for providing us with really useful insights that I think will have application to so many other people that are struggling with these issues. And I commend this report to you and really look forward to having a conversation now about the future Greek style. Thank you.
Thank you, Podrick. Great to be an example for once in our lives. Ωραίο πράγμα να αισθανόμαστε ότι είμαστε παράδειγμα μια φορά.
So, without further ado, I would like to tell you that now we will watch a short video, a short introductive video, and then we will start immediately with the first panel. I would like to say to everyone who is watching us on Facebook Live that you can use the chat beneath the video in order to ask questions, to write your comments, and my colleagues and I will be available to convey those messages to the panel. I have asked the panelists to respect the timeline and the agenda in order to have time for questions. I hope that we will make it. Now let's watch this short 1-minute video and then we will start immediately with the first panel. Okay, so now we are back with lessons from the past, challenges for the future. I will not spend any more time and I will give the floor immediately to our first speaker, Ms. Garifalia Anastasopoulou. She is an assistant coordinator in the Racist Violence Recording Network. The network had a very important role into showcasing this phenomenon, but it will have a very important role to play from now on. So, I would like her to share her view for the future, to talk about the trends. So, Garifalia, you have the floor. Hello, Eleni. Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much for this invitation. There are other colleagues that can speak about this issue better than me, and a lot of colleagues have played an extremely important role in the creation of the network, and they have also contributed in this very important effort. I will speak about the basic truths after talking in short what is the network. The Racist Violence Recording Network was founded in 2011 after an initiative by the National Committee for Human Rights and the UNHCR in Greece, after two things that we have understood back then. It was a period when we understood that there is a lack of an official and efficient system of recording racist violence incidents. Therefore, there was a need to interconnect all those civil society bodies that were recording such events. So in 2011 was a time period where racist violence had reached a high point in Greece, and that in collaboration with the lack of a effective and unique and holistic system of recording racist violence, understands that does not allow victims to have access to violence. So due to the facts that and the characteristics of those crimes, we understand that those racist attacks reflect also to the society's victims and increase the insecurity. And the perpetrators believe that they can be at large unpunished. So the victims themselves have to prove a phenomenon that the state does not take into account. Therefore, the members of the network try and decide to pen down their own definition of a racist violence event and to have a common view. So in the pilot phase of the network, for 2 months, the network recorded 63 racist violence incidents, and 51 of them we have more than one perpetrators, and in 18 cases we see that they have a modus operandi status. In a modus operandi, it is clear and it is reflected to the report of our network. The perpetrators act in organized groups, and they have dogs a lot of times. They have minors participating. They are dressed in black and sometimes in cargo military pants, and they wear helmets, or they have their faces covered. They are, let's say, civil guardian groups, so to say, and they attack to migrants and refugees in public spaces. In 8 cases that were recorded back in 2011, 8 cases, the victims recognize people that are connected and can be traced back to Golden Dawn. At the same time, as we can see, based on the recordings of 2012, which are more than 100 cases, 59%, I apologize, of the cases are modus operandi cases. So we also have another very high number in 2013, and after 2013,
after Pavlos Fyssas' murder and, of course, the let's say the pushback by the state authorities, this phenomenon has been decreasing. In 2018, we can see that there is also a rise in cases compared to the previous years, an increase that is combined with cases of organized racist violence in Sub-4 Square in Mytilene, where migrants and refugees are targeted by organized racist violence groups. I would like to remind you that this is a violence that was understood by the authorities, and we know that in 2018 and forward the state tried to do some things. 2021 is not included in this report since we are in 2021. We are looking forward to the data of 2021 because we will see how the judgment of the court affected the facts, but we have seen that modus operandi was repeated in schools also. 2020 was a year with decreased cases when it comes to modus operandi cases. Out of 107 cases recorded, only in 3 out of them we recognize, the victims rather recognized that the perpetrators belonged in extremist groups. However, in 2018, in 2020 rather, it is a COVID era, and when in other targeted groups the cases and the violence was decreased, but there was an increase in cases that were targeted to migrants and refugees. So this group is targeted as a threat for national territory. So there are other factors such as the lack of a cohesive and person-based policy for refugees and migrants. So out of the 107 cases, we can see that in 74 target refugees, migrants, and human rights supporters. And if we want to see the status of the perpetrators, we can see that only in 3 cases are members of the extremist groups. However, we should not, we should always be vigilant, is the fact that 13 cases, a very increased number compared to the previous years, is connected to attacks from groups containing not only citizens but also policemen. Now, when it comes to some other data, quantitative data from 2020, we can see that the majority of the cases against migrants and refugees, from 74 to 58, we know that more than one perpetrators participated. This quantitative characteristic is repeated in 2021. 43 cases took place in islands having hotspots or refugee and identification centers. We see that this phenomenon leaves Athens behind, and it is focused with different intensity, of course, but with same qualitative characteristics in other areas which there are migrants and refugees. Last but not least, we would like to say that while in 2019 only 7 cases where the victims recognized the perpetrators as people who have done similar things before, in 2021 we have 21 such cases out of 107. 17 cases take place mainly in reception identification centers at the islands of the Aegean, but also in other areas in mainland where we have migrants and refugees, which seems that the that the impunity's effect is that it can increase such cases. You can see here by this diagram that if we were to add cases that have perpetrators as citizens, or members of extremist groups, or a combination in 2020 against refugees, migrants, and human rights supporters, one case every month took place. And especially we had a lot of cases during the first trimester in 2020. So the policies of tackling racist crimes are based in prevention and tackling. Prevention with having very specific policies, and when it comes to the tackling of the problem, we're going to give access to justice, which means that we have to report such a racist crime and in the investigation, as well as to allow victims to have access to support and protection. There are a lot of steps that have been done, not only in a access to those people to record those crimes, but also when it comes to the support of the victims or of the undocumented migrants. However, we know that there is a lack of implementation of the existing framework, which means that there are some good cases, a phenomenon which says that racist organized violence against migrants and crimes, and then we have a secondary victimization of the state authorities instead of support. 10 years later, there are some positive changes in the framework. However, there is a lack of commitment where it comes to the implementation of this network. In 2020, the network records a case against a migrant in Evros, which was hospitalized after the attack, and then he was prisoned because he was undocumented, while we know that the law supports that person. Last element, in order to ratify what we have also already said, is the fact that according to an older statistical analysis, we have seen that from 2012 until 2019, the majority of the victims that don't want to go to the police, they say that they're either afraid of the secondary victimization or the lack of trust towards the authorities. They don't feel that they will receive justice. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Garifallia. I would like to say that already some fellow attendants are asking from us to share those data in English on our website. We have started receiving some questions. I will group them at the end, but however, I would like to take advantage of my position as a coordinator in order to lay emphasis on something that is very timely, because when it comes to the police and its relation to far-right extremist violence, okay, we don't want to generalize, but we know that there is something that persists, and something has to do with the fact that there is a lack of accountability and the impunity. That is something that leads to more things than just under-reporting of cases. The vast majority, this is also linked to active involvement of Hellenic police representatives in those incidents. This is highly alarming, very timely, and this is also linked to what happened at Peram a few days ago. We have Mr. Kapagiannis in our second panel. I don't know whether he's going to talk about it. Now, the floor goes to Professor Yorgos Plios. He's a professor and director of the Laboratory for Social Research in Mass Media at the University of Athens. And he has also authored a very interesting book on fake news. And I believe that this is very much associated to our topic. Okay, so no further ado, you have the floor. Please unmute your microphone. Yes, okay, you're right. Well, thank you very much. I would like to thank you for the invitation. I would like to congratulate you on this good work that you have been doing for many years now, a work that is not easy, however, is extremely interesting. Thank you for the data you shared with us. Thank you for your kind words about my book, but I would like to say that in some countries, the migration issue is the main issue that where fake news focus on. So we have Greece ranking first, then we have Germany, then we have Spain. So in Greece, most of the fake news of the past years have to do with immigration issues. And it is on this basis that many politicians' careers have been built upon, and I'm sharing that on the basis of my capacity. My hometown is Mytilene Island, and I have personally witnessed cases of police arbitrary events where on the bus some policemen grabbed the wallet of a migrant and they took all the money. The same happened to a bus station. And they asked for identification documents from an Albanian citizen at the bus station. He produced them, but then they ripped them off and they said, okay, now you no longer have any. So I would also like to say that mass media is my main point of expertise. And I would like to say the following. What I've seen from my studies is that we need to understand why there's such a high penetration of this ideology and philosophy in some cases, and why this far-right extremist discourse resonates so much. Well, the reason why is that the way in which migrants or refugees are presented by the mass media leads to their stigmatization, leads to an overall degradation of their profile, and people are afraid that they might be left without jobs, that tourism might be affected, and this is a reaction towards this stigmatization. And I must say that mass media is responsible for this stigmatization. Of course, politicians do nothing to resolve that. When it comes to Greece, let me share something that happened in Ukraine back in 2014. I was in Kiev and I was a visiting professor. You all know that the two main organizations that pioneered in the protests against Yanukovych had to do with this forced border that was based in a specific city where they had a majority of their gangs. And then we had the right sector that originates from the pro-Russian part of Ukraine. Those were the pioneers of this case. And in April, representatives of those organizations were in a coffee shop that's called Mafia, and of course, this is no random title. This is a coffee shop located at the northern part of Independence Square of Maidan. They just started shooting. So it's bizarre, but I mention this incident for the following reason. Well, a couple of days later, when I revisited the place that had been occupied by the pioneers of this rebel in Ukraine, they had hoisted a banner saying that we don't want to have an interventionist state. So, okay, we have fascists being against the interventionist state. So I can't help but wonder what's happening. So let me elaborate on that, because this is highly relevant to the future. I believe that the pillar of far-right extremism, the pillar of fascism, is based on a few things that have to do with the rights of the nation, and those rights exceed and go beyond the rights of the individual. We cannot talk about equal rights for people who belong to different national groups. And fascism always has a participatory basis. It may be such as the case of the German or Italian fascism, but it has a participatory base. So this is the heart, the core of the fascism and the far-right extremist culture. And that's the only way to go with that. We have the military prominent aspect that corresponds to what the Weber called the iron cage of the capitalism. On the other hand, we also have the corporate model of fascism. And at the same time, this fascism might be either verbal or practical, meaning violent and brutal. And this brings me to my main topic of discussion here. Far-right extremism of the Golden Dawn consisted of practical incidents of violence. This is what made Golden Dawn stand out compared to other fascist organizations or other far-right extremist organizations and formations here in our country, regardless of their political goals. We all remember the declaration of the Golden Dawn that went against the institutions. Do you remember what happened in the case of them peeing outside the mega channel, TV channel? You remember the rally at Monet Square. You remember where the late Theodorakis had also made a speech. Can you remember that they were talking about betrayal on behalf of the academia? So they were moving against all modernistic institutions. At the same time, they were highly critical and highly violent towards who were non-Europeans, either were Asian, Muslim, Africans, Slavs or Turkish. Well, I believe in the case of Slavs and Turkish, they had the intention to undertake action against them, but they did not do that. And of course, always against the leftist people. And let us not forget that we have the anti-communism, which lies at the heart of these anti-leftist fascist violence, because that's a propaganda aiming at making democracies falling apart, because that's the ultimate goal. Everything else is just the medium, just the means to achieve this goal. And the same applies in the case of those migration flows and all the problems that come with it. Anyway, no far-right extremist party could not have exist in Greece if there was not a legitimization basis. This is democratization basis, what as I call it. This has to do with our neighboring countries and neighboring people. Call them anything you might like. And we know that this model has been proliferating for many years now by the church, the schools, mass media, the army, and the various events and manifestations in municipalities. All these things are indicative of the legitimization basis of every far-right extremist organization and formation. And apart from that narrative, we also have violence against all those targets, the targeted populations. And in order to start concluding, I would like to say that right now we are seeing a shift towards these from the extreme manifestations of this violence in schools to the less extreme cases. I'm sure that the court ruling against the Golden Dawn after the murder of Pavlos Fyssas played a major role in this aspect. We know that the members that have been imprisoned are just the heart of the organization. We still have many others operating at large. And of course, we must not forget that we also have a neoliberal organization and arrangement of those relations in our country. And of course, when we want to promote the national economy and to highlight the crisis and how this needs to be tackled and how this needs to go beyond the individual rights, I believe that in the times of crisis, I believe most of the individual rights have been abolished, and this is something that will not stop easily. I believe that all those powers have found the right tool in order to suppress those individual and civil rights. And of course, this does not happen in the form that used to happen, in the form of a camp, but this happens through the necrosis and the decay of democracy, the republic, meaning the abolition of the proper rules for the proper operation of the society. And of course, mass media are involved there, because we know that in the past we had fascist organizations, mass fascist organizations that were operating. We had the youth of Metaxas, a dictator. All the same happened in Germany or Italy. Now things have changed. Now this rarely happens through the mass media. So today, we are here to see how mass media try to manipulate this ideology. And in conclusion, I would like to say that on the basis of the condition mentioned before, there is a shift from the non-verbal to the verbal manifestations of activism towards a corporate-like form of far-right practice that is based on the necrosis, the transcendence, either segmental or whole, or in part or in whole of the democracy, and I believe that this is the role that will be undertaken by a new political formation that will be called upon to incorporate and integrate all those aspects of extremism in Greece. Thank you for your attention. Well, I believe that you were highly on time, and I would also like to thank you because you incorporated the aspect of the pandemic in there. Because yes, it's true that there is a difficulty accessing the population and to record those incidents. You talked about the abolition of rights, things that lead to res judicata, things that lead to the establishment of previous cases that might have an impact on the future. And you have talked about the shift towards the verbal activism. We call it hate speech, and how we record those cases, because it's a very difficult thing to do. We have focused on the organized forms of racist violence, so we want to isolate this phenomenon. Okay, we have too many questions. I'm looking all around because I read the questions posted on the chat. So I'm writing them all. I will try to group them and we'll answer them later on. Now, Mr. Adonis Elens, the next speaker. He's an associate professor of political science at the University of Cyprus. He is also an academic expert of the organizational nature of this phenomenon, apart from the hate speech. He's also focusing on its organizational nature with regards to the various formations. And of course, he's also to offer a benchmark and a comparative overview. But let me give him the floor. Mr. Elinas, thank you for joining us today.
Γεια σας.
Hello. I would like to thank you very much for this kind invitation. Good afternoon. My intervention is from the view of a comparative political scientist. I would like to speak about the golden dawn and say the following, that political science doesn't have a lot of things to say about the 7th October of 2020. Thousands of people waiting outside a court. Political science, we have a lot of publications rather about right extremism groups and how they try to incorporate some ideas or put them behind, or sometimes even collaborating with those right extremism, or how institutions react to those right extremist groups. And we're talking about the free democracies and how they try to tackle their enemies. Political science, and more specifically comparative political science, has less things to say on how societies react to far-right extremism. There are a lot of examples of such reactions, such as mobilizations in Germany against Mrs. Merkel's effort to collaborate with AfD in Thüringen, reactions against small far-right extremisms, even very small political parties. And recently, the Sardine movement in Italy, where they tried to go against Sardini's view when it comes to the migratory issue. So we have examples of how the societies react to far-right extremism groups. Greece is a very interesting case because it shows that social reactions against the fascist groups, I'm trying to talk about that in my book, which will be issued shortly, also in Greek, affects directly and indirectly to the development of the far-right extremism. It affects the way that those parties are organized. As Mr. Plios said, especially when it comes to parties who want to build a movement basis, or they have some kind of activism elements. There are political parties which have ambitions, and so on a local level they try to intervene to the local societies. And what happened in Athens didn't happen only here, but also happened in other societies.
So we know that there's a direct impact from this anti-fascist endeavor, and the goal has been to have it penetrating and becoming consolidated among these communities. And then we also had the election-related impact. Indirectly, I believe that the social revolt led to observing a shift in the institutional roles of police or the justice. I believe that the well-known picture outside the Court of Appeals shows the interactions between societies and the institutional framework and how they can exert pressure so that they can bring about all the results that they want to achieve. And I would like to agree with Eleni. I believe that this is a very positive case of how societies can bring about change. And it is a case where we see that it attenuates the narrative. You can see what happens here. Okay, Golden Dawn is running out of options. Now they are losing the trial. We have the two pillars of the liberal democracy. We have elections, we have the courts, and yet they managed to win in this fight against fascism. And I believe that in that case, this element helps us better understand the societal aspect, thus simultaneously raising questions regarding whether those actors have an impact on the social outcomes and the phenomena that we want to study. There's also the broader question as to what the next day will bring along for a new movement. I'm talking about the anti-fascist movement that more or less has achieved its goal. Usually, literature says that when those movements achieve their goals, then they start wearing off. That's my question. That's my conclusion. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Antonis. I agree that one of the main lessons from this story is how we can collaborate with people and groups from different backgrounds, how we have managed to sit all together around the table and co-shape, let's say, that reaction. This was an excellent introduction to our next speaker because he has been at the forefront of this story. So, in order to have time for questions, I will give the floor to Mr. Kostis Papaioannou, who is a former president of the Greek National Commission for Human Rights and coordinator of Change Initiative. But above all, one of the pillars of that effort, he is the soul of the Racist Violence Recording Network and one of the persons who truly understand from the beginning the importance of finding common ground where we should. Kostis, you have the floor without further ado, and then we can have time for questions. Thank you very much. Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much for this invitation and the initiative for organizing this event. Since I know that we have only 7 or 8 minutes, I have chosen 7 or 8 lessons that, in my opinion, we should keep from this decade that made us wiser. I'm talking about 2010 and until the end of the trial. We have started without knowing what's going to happen, but then we entered like a horror spin. First lesson, the importance of the trial itself. In my opinion, what happened last October in Alexandras Avenue was a unique moment where the feeling of justice of people met the co-decision and the decision by justice as it was spoken by the president of the court. I agree with Mr. Elinas. Those times are rare, where society, the voice of society, is yearning for justice and is shouting for justice, and this is one of the rare moments where that public opinion meets the core decisions and the decisions of the justice. So that allows us to keep that lesson that we should go to the justice system, that we should bring those crimes to the court, that despite mistrust, despite nagging, which of course was somehow expected, in the end, those of us who thought that we should go to the justice, we proved that we were right. Second lesson, Golden Dawn is something different from the far-right extremism. We should always be vigilant, and we should always try to have a clear mind and vision, because we might be on the opposite sides with far-right extremism, but we should distinguish the groups which are violent groups, which are soaked in blood, and they have it in their mission, with the far-right extremism in general, with a lot of aspects and a lot of groups. And in this second lesson, I would like to say that the right is completely different from the far-right, because some of us, we have some politics and we believe that we are opponents with those rightist policies, but we should not make the mistakes to name them far-right policies. And left groups always, or rather very often, tend to do that mistake. But it is not only that it is wrong, but unfortunately we give a basis and we promote the far right. Lesson third, there is an ongoing open battle inside the institutions, and we should be aware of this battle. We should take it into consideration. The last case, if you wish, during this battle, if you wish, has been what has been happening in justice after the fact that the public prosecutor of the Arios Pagos said that Patelis can go out of prison. We saw it with the proposal of the public prosecutor Economou, so we should always bear in mind those interactions, and we should try and be aware when things are not positive, what has been going on. I am just saying that in justice we can understand what is happening, but in parts of the Hellenic police there are things that we cannot understand due to we can say that there are different things happening. Fourth lesson that we should always bear in mind, not only us but also those who have the tendency to go there. The theories of two extremes, they are harmful to democracy because this is related to democracy and to those who harm democracy. So if there are theories of the two extremes, or if we try to keep distance, the same distance from both extremes after what happened in the high school in Thessaloniki, in Evosmos, then we understand that this extreme is going crazy. Fifth lesson. Greece understands that social backroads and the social inequality, as we have seen that in Greece, and with identity battles, this is where far extremist groups find place and find ground to develop. Without identity issues, the far-right extremism cannot flourish and cannot develop. During the last years, we have seen that such kind of identity issues, either we're talking from the ID cards. You remember the ID cards, the othering, the fact that we used to have migrants and refugees in Greece. All those issues are complemented by the anti-vaccination movement, which has given a new push to this anti-systemic, if you wish, and anti-state movement. This is not happening only in Greece, of course, this is happening all around the world. Sixth lesson. Giving room to the social parameter of the far-right extremism is the so-called neoliberal racism. The people who want to try and protect our rights against the Islamic risk can keep a neoliberal characteristics, for example, for an LGBTIQs, but at the same time they want to hide the core which has characteristics of gender or religious racism. Seventh lesson. The conviction of a terrorist group and of a criminal group, allows the people who used to belong to that group to go to other groups, and they fight for the leadership. Of course, things are better compared to when we have a central leadership to Golden Dawn, but we should keep being vigilant, because the central leadership was the arm and the head of the movement, but sometimes was a mechanism of control of such extremism powers, which can be proven to be very dangerous. Last, eighth lesson. Since I have started talking about this decade, the normalization of the far right, the last decade, every Greek government had some kind of relationship with the far right groups, or within the governing party, which allow me, I believe it is the worst expression of the far right groups. It is a tendency within the governing group, or as we had in the past, collaborations with far-right political parties, or collaborations with parties such as Laos, but always having far-right voices inside the governing political parties. And this normalization allows us to understand that we cannot work without a plan. And I want to add that I agree with your report. We need documentation. I am really pleased for the work that we have done and that the Racist Violence Recording Network keeps doing. I am very pleased from the work that we did at the observatory of the Golden Dawn trial. So the combination of the social movements that have helped so much, but at the same time having documentation and with the support of lawyers, I think that shows us the way forward. And of course, the fact that we should always have a legal strategy and a legal support. Kosti, thank you very much. This was a history lesson for grown-ups. I'm always pleased when I participate at the panel, and apart from just coordinating, we can see new thoughts. And I know that you also introduced the issue of the pandemic and the fact that the anti-vaccination movement coexists, so to say, with those phenomena. Me, myself, I have drawn a conclusion from this panel that we should focus on the pandemic and the effects of the pandemic more seriously, and what is happening to the far-right extremism groups in combination with the pandemic. Thank you very much. We have 25 minutes, 25 full minutes for questions. Thank you very much for respecting the timeline. We have various questions that I will convey to you. And if there is someone else who wants to add a question, please do so. I will share the questions now.
A question that goes to Garifalya and Kostis, it has to do with the schools, organized schools, or even also for what you said before, the vocational schools and what's happening over there, because I believe that now a new pattern has emerged there. Garifalya, there's also another question that goes to you, but of course, if there's someone else who would like to make a comment on that, it has to do with the protection of people who work in the fields. I'm talking about the in-the-field working defenders, the various recommendations that are being made. A question to Mr. Plius regarding the fake news. Well, we see that people would like you to elaborate on that with regards to how they are generated and how we can address these problems. There is another question that is more general, and allow me to add to this question. Maybe you could also add a typical example. I don't know if you remember back in January 2021 with two young kids, two minors, who attacked a person on the metro, on the subway, and at first it had been said by the mass media that they were unaccompanied minors, but then it turned out that they were just Greek minors. So we see that fake news on the social media sometimes are accompanied by another direction. And, well, I think I would like a comment from you on that. Now, when it comes to Mr. Elinas, well, when it comes to the totalitarian movements, there's a question about how this is related to Greece. Again, I'm going to abuse my position and add something to this question. I believe that what happened at the borders back in 2020, apart from all the other things that happened, there are also some other imported goods with regards to representatives of far-right extremist parties from Germany and other bloggers, and maybe there's a trend of linking those movements in Greece with the totalitarian movements from abroad. I don't know whether you have a comment to make on that. And there is also another question about justice. So, I don't know whether there is a sort of cap in the justice world about these things. Well, that's how I have grouped the questions. With no further ado, I would like to give the floor for a few minutes to the speakers in the way in which they address the audience. I will start with Garifalya, and if anything else comes up, I will also ask it. Okay, so thank you, Eleni, for the interesting questions. I will try to be very brief, and I would like to remind you that if you want any more information, feel free to visit our network website where you can find our recommendations as well as the press release we issued 1 year after the Golden Dawn trial, where we comment on the modus operandi I mentioned before that took place in the school community. So this network does not only record racist violence incidents, it also records cases that go against human rights and when people are targeted for this action. So the first effort to frame and present this issue has to do with monitoring those attacks and include them in our qualitative and quantitative analysis. Now, when it comes to our recommendations, although someone might find out more about our recommendations if they visit our reports, I think we should start from scratch. There is no supportive legal framework for that. And since 2015, when we saw the refugee flows increase in our country, meaning that we have more colleagues working on the field, we see that those people have been targeted, and this becomes more pronounced in early 2020. So we should start from setting a definition on what a human rights advocate is all about and how we can create a specific legal framework for their protection. Now, when it comes to the school environment-related incidents, like we said in our announcement, in our press release 1 year after the Golden Dawn trial, something that one would not have expected after this historic trial would be a repetition of this pattern, even if it was limited, but it has a special symbolic value when those things happen within the school environment. And this is the standing position of our network, because we're not only talking about tackling racist violence, we talk about prevention of racist violence in all its manifestations, because we want to avoid getting to the point of having this racist violence manifestation. Either we talk about organized violence or not, and this happens by the same sources when this is not necessarily combined with a racist motive. Thank you, Gary Falla. And before giving the floor to Mr. Plios, I would like to add 2 more questions that were just posted. One general question about whether far-right extremism in Greece has an institutional background, and another question from Eftalia asking the political coexistence between the part of Mr. Kamenis and Syriza can be included in this rationale. Then what's the framework under which we should consider this coalition? So, Mr. Plios, you have the floor. Thank you very much. So before answering the question, the last question that you asked, because I have an answer about it, I would like to say a few things about the pandemic. Apart from Greece, I have also run a study in Cyprus, and I must say that the percentage of what we call the sprayed people in Cyprus, as the case in Greece, accounts for 35% of the population. So it is my estimate that this uprising of alarm in Cyprus originates from this part of the population. So a part of those people, well, I don't want to call them anti-vaccination supporters. Anyway, those people voted for alarm. And I believe that those are the reasons why they opted for this choice in the elections, because they want to have the right to self-determination, etc. So I believe that when we have elections in Greece, and if we have a more serious or a more moderate Golden Dawn party, then we will see a rise again. I insist that there's a shift of the far right towards less violent forms of manifestations. However, I believe that verbal attacks will be more numerous. And I'm not only talking about hate speech as we know it, because hate speech might be present in public discourse, etc. I'm talking about discourse that appears in the parliament, the police, in the news. And this is what will create specific impressions about this population. And okay, maybe we don't have refugees and migrants being in danger so much, but when we have organized pushbacks in the Aegean, that's also a form of racist violence. And we also have people dying. We have very bad developments there. Please go to Mytilene. We have 6 or 7 Hellenic Coast Guard ships being there. They are not in the harbor in the morning, and they go to chase those yachts throughout the day. And they have their flying flags of the Byzantine Empire. Can you imagine that when we talk about the Hellenic Coast Guard vessels? Anyway, that's a comment that I'd like to make on this part. And I believe that this part of the population will be a major pool that might vote in favor of the Golden Dawn and far-right parties. And I believe that they will try to attract those people. Now, when it comes to fake news, let me say this. Like I said before, the majority of fake news is built around the most important issue. Well, okay, it's most important as per the public opinion. I would like to remind you that a couple of years ago, 3 years ago, if memory serves right, in the analysis survey, it was found for the first time in our country that people believe that the migration issue is the most important issue that our country is facing with. It's not unemployment or the poor economy, nothing else. That's the most important issue. So it is an issue that is very promising in terms of the fake news generation. And this is something that resonates at Lesbos Island, in the mass media. And so we have other speakers who spoke 2 weeks ago about a very detailed list of fake news that were published, and they also impacted on voting behavior in the regional and national elections. And of course, you do realize that many political parties had a motto of let's throw them back at sea. So the news center is built next to the sea at Mavrovouni. Yes, this is what happens. So there is a symbolic action. They're not throwing them back at sea, but they're throwing them at sea, literally. So I believe that this will continue. And to my point of view, the goal does not have to do with whether the deprivation of rights of migrants, refugees, Greek citizens. And allow me to say, as a part of the academia, I have heard people saying that this should not enter the university. He is a leftist. Or you might have representatives of mass media saying, don't go there. Don't approach this guy because we don't want to give them a voice. Those things are not independent or standalone incidents. We have such foxes, and now they have obtained a new form, a form of exclusion and isolation and deprivation of rights. And okay, we might not have those direct and violent attacks that lead people to the morgue or to the hospital, but we know that this perception has been adopted by a larger majority of the population. So we do realize that there are specific consequences about that. Fascism is not something that exists only in the streets. Fascist movements, fascist groups, such cases of gangs, so without access to the state mechanism and elsewhere, they cannot exist. To put it simply, the power of the Golden Dawn has been inflicting violence on the streets, and we know that we need to respond to this violence only with violence. And if this is not exerted by the police, no one can stop them. So this is the way in which we pave the way to have another type of management and treatment by other groups, things that go against the democracy. So yes, those things exist, they're for real. According to complaints that have been submitted, we know that some parties the two big parties, two major parties finance the Golden Dawn. We know what has happened in the case of the former leader of the New Democracy Party, Adonis Samaras. One of his associates was a Golden Dawn member. So we know that this has a very long-standing history. That's all from me. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Professor. Before giving the floor to Mr. Elinas, allow me to ask another question. I believe there's a question that is very meaningful. You talked about the importance of the Golden Dawn Watch Observatory. Well, maybe you and Mr. Elinas would like to make a comment to that. Do you believe that the fact that the mass media was not there apart from the last days, and maybe in a couple of instances, do you think that means there's insufficient media coverage? And apart from lack of interest with regards to the agenda setting, etc., do you believe that this might have been something that was directed, that was a political decision in order to something that was linked to the state or other grey mechanisms.
Ναι, κύριε καθηγητά.
Απευθύνεστε σε μένα?
Ναι, ναι.
So was this question addressed to me? Yes, to you and Mr. Plios maybe as well. Look, the relationships of the mass media with more institutional actors in Greece have been also documented with publications. When it comes to Golden Dawn, I would say that after 2013, we have realized that we cannot give space or voice to such a criminal group, especially to the mass media, to the main mass media. Greece is here a good example, as well as the demonstrations or the strikes that we had by journalists in Greece when, according to the constitution, they had to promote Golden Dawn before the elections. We have good cases. Now, when it comes to the violence and on the streets and how the police should react, in my opinion, the case of Golden Dawn shows us that the violence at streets can also be tackled by social actors who act mainly non-violent, but by organizing a human wall, let's say, against that violence. And the mass character of some demonstrations in 2012 and 2013 put pressure to the state actors to do what they have to do. So, in my opinion, the answer is not only institutional but is also social, and we should always showcase Greece and what is happening here. Now, when it comes to the movement, I think that you have already answered it. In my opinion, however, what is interesting is the following. Far right in Greece is trying to have presence not only institutionally as with a form of the party, but also as movements. For example, acting like Forza Nova in Italy, for example, and having some social actions as the Golden Dawn did, adopting the repertoire which we used to link with different kind of political movements. So it is interesting to start and study those movement actions, if we can name them thus, of the far right, because they we can see that the social actors try to work against them, and in my opinion the social element is also very important here. Mr. Plios, also you. The Samaras government started to react because we have pressures from abroad, because Greece was Greece's turn to take the European presidency. We don't know if we didn't have interventions from abroad what would have happened with Samaras government. And let us not forget the delay. I agree with your general remark. Without the social character, we cannot put pressure on the state actors, and this is, of course, certain. But let us not forget something. Golden Dawn is trying to have silence at the roads. They want to have the domination, and this is done by violence. This cannot be tackled only with social reactions. Therefore, we should put a stop to the violence of Golden Dawn and other far-right extremist groups. And unfortunately, violence can be stopped only by violence, and this should be done by the state, by the only, let's say, actor who can be violent lawfully according to the constitution. And when it comes to the trial, we had the effort of a lot of people who have tried to work, and I would like to congratulate Mr. Kabayanis for what they have done to the trial. I don't know if we didn't have those actors, what would have happened. We see people that even if they don't speak publicly, we should say that we shouldn't be very hasty and we should let the justice do their own job by themselves. It was one of the few times that they want to speak, and the only thing that they want to say is that we should leave justice to do their work without comments and without obstacles. So the logic of fascism is the following: is to oppress the rights, either in the roads or by other means. I apologize if I have spoken more than I should have. Not at all. Everything was very interesting, and of course, now I would like to give the floor to Mr. Papaioannou to share his own thoughts. And we have kept the time. Thank you very much for being strict and for speaking on time. Kosti, you have the floor. Thank you very much. Just two thoughts. One, when it comes to education, what has happened or has been happening at the professional high schools is not, we should not generalize them for the education as a whole, but we should not, on the other side, we should not believe that they are rare examples. The area of professional or vocational schools are a very specific area of the education, and when we speak about an urban megacity as Thessaloniki, we should also bear in mind the social groups of those students and also the ethnic groups and the ethnic groups of those students. We have people and we have students with special characteristics. They are in direct collaboration and direct connection with nationalist movements, but also with fans from specific football groups, and also the fact that we have students of also that are not minor anymore. They go to those vocational schools even if they are adults legally. There is also a great issue when it comes to the Greek education system, which is also connected with policies at the area of education. Right now, maybe it's not the right time and place to discuss them, but we should bear in mind and find some time to discuss them. I work at a high school. The fact that in the Greek high school we don't have any kind of project, lesson, time, or space in order to give them a creative, let's say, space or time, and as well as the so-called assessment, is something that causes problems. We should not be, let's say, certain that are done without planning. The Greek high school doesn't have any weapons in order to fight such phenomena and such trends. And the other thing is related to Mrs. Papa's question. In the 8th lesson, I have talked about the standardization of the far right by its inclusion to the governments. There are a lot of differentiations, okay, from era to era and from political party to political party. We can, let's say, find different characteristics or different intensity and how they have affected the policies. So in order to answer Mrs. Papa's question, I think that in the major issues that related to migrant or identity issues, when we had Syriza as a government. So I think that Mr. Kamenos did not affect the Tsipras government so much. However, on the other side, within that, let's say, issue, we can say that the presence and the fact that this is not a taboo, a standardization. When Mr. Varidis was made minister for the first time, this was not a taboo anymore. Right now, everything is considered business as usual. Now it is considered normal to have 3 ministers for that have apologized for their racist ideas, racist views. This is standardization. And of course, we should not forget that this invitation towards the far right to the political arena, Samaras and Venizelos bear responsibility, but on the other hand, we should not forget that all political parties bear some kind of responsibility, but some political parties now have understood what has happened and some of them have not really understood. Thank you very much.
Εμείς ευχαριστούμε, Κωστή, και
Thank you very much, Kostis. And I'd also like to thank all the panelists for the very interesting thoughts that they shared with us. Thank you for keeping your time. And I believe that the conclusion might be the following. Some things were okay, some things were not. But maybe we're at a new starting point. There's still a long way to go and many things to be done. That's my lesson from this panel. Anyway, I would like to thank you all. Now we're going to watch another 1-minute video and then we will start with the second panel. See you soon.
καλησπέρα και πάλι.
So hello again. I believe that all the panelists are here with us. So, can the host please show us Mr. Kabayanis? He says that the host should allow Mr. Kabayanis to turn their camera on. So, I would like to start with the introduction. Now, the second panel, entitled The Significance of a Legal Strategy Against Far-Right Extremism. Yes, I believe that this is very interesting. We have many active colleagues and friends and people involved in this field. I'm so pleased that we're all here today. We don't have much time. Like I said to the previous panel, we need to try to limit ourselves to 7 to 8 minutes each. For those who just connected, I'd like to let you know that you can post your questions in the chat, and we will group them and ask them during the Q&A round. And with no further ado, I would like to give the floor to Mr. Thanasis Kabayanis. I don't think he needs any additional recommendations. He was the plaintiff's lawyer at the Golden Dawn trial, representing the Egyptian fishermen family, and I believe that he's an emblematic personality in the anti-fascist movement. So, Thanasis, you have the floor. So, can you hear him? Because I cannot hear Thanasis. Okay, no. No? Okay, maybe we will skip Thanasis in order for him to resolve this issue. Okay, let's move on to the next speaker. I can't see Cleo. Cleo, are you there? Okay, we all know that lawyers and technology are not in the best terms possible. So, I would like to give the floor to Vasilis Kerasiotis. I see that he's there. He's a lawyer. Eleni says Vasilis. Sorry to interrupt, but I think that maybe Yota should speak first because she's before me. Yes, it's true, but I don't think that Yota is with us. There are some technical glitches here. I see that she's not there. Okay, there she is. Okay, Yota is here, so Yota has the floor first. Hello, Yota. What did you say, Cleo? Well, I believe there's a problem with internet connection here in the center. Every hour we have a power cut, so maybe this is why. Okay, this is what happens in live shows. Thanasis is also there. Yes, it's true, but there is a problem with the sound. So, Yota, if it's okay with you, I would like to give the floor to Cleo. Cleo Papapadoleon. She's a well-known lawyer. She has represented people in numerous interesting trials. Right now, she was a lawyer in the Zakostopoulos case, the Zakostopoulos trial. We had asked for a comment about that. But Cleo, I would like to say that when I was listening to the previous panelists, I thought of the gap between what we experienced last year in front of the Court of Appeals and the ambience at the trial of Kassidiaris back in 2012, 2013, those wild times. You're a lawyer there, and that's how I remembered it. And to see that we have gone a long way since then, but I still remember the brutality that this courtroom was meeting back then. The same feeling is a feeling I have in the Zakostopoulos case. So, with no further ado, you have the floor. We're listening to you. Thank you. I would like to thank you for this invitation. It's a great pleasure for me finding myself among people with whom we have worked together. We have been walking down this path for many years now. I believe that this is the thread I would like to start elaborating on. I would like to go back to 2013 and the trial that you mentioned before. Before I start, I would like to say a few things about the case of Zak. So, to start from the conviction verdict against the Golden Dawn, that is the ultimate milestone both for the issue that is being discussed today and more generally in terms of the court, the rule of law and democracy. It is in this context that I'd like to talk about the trial that you mentioned, Elaine, before. So back in 2013, the public prosecutor suggested to release Mr. Kassidiaris from all charges because he was accused with bodily harm and assault against a foreign student. He had stated in the audience that the defendant, meaning Kassidiaris, as well as his organization, go against violence, convict violence. 7 years later, 2020, this defendant, Ilias Kassidiaris, and his organization were convicted for running a criminal organization, in the context of which, in this meantime, they committed homicides, arsons, they caused severe bodily harm, etc., and things that we all are aware of. Now, this incident is an incident I would like to mention, not just to laugh, because this is ridiculous, really, when we listen to a prosecutor's opinion back in 2013. And I would like to remind you that those things were said while the incident of Kassidiaris against the journalist Canelli had occurred, where he hit her on camera, he slapped her. And I'm saying that because we see a clear shift of the justice and the courts. It is in this space that I would like to say a few things about the legal strategy that we are discussing in this panel. In every country, Greece included, justice might take a more solid form, might operate as a mechanism for the proliferation of suppression or a dominant ideology or the main social stereotypes. However, we should not be lenient towards the other party. The justice, in numerous cases over the past months, and I'm talking about cases that were very important. They were important in terms of the status of the rule of law and the future of justice in the society in our country. So, the legal mechanism was divided. In what sense? Okay, we talked about the Golden case. They were convicted 1 year ago. And within this year, we have seen various standalone decisions regarding the suspensions of prisoners, and some are accepted. But this does not mean that the mechanism is taking steps backwards to what it was in the past. This is just a reminder of the Greek justice, because it had a specific attitude towards Golden for many years. This means that this aspect remains. This means that this is still a part of the legal mechanism, a solid legal mechanism that has specific stance and attitude towards this mechanism, and they cannot tolerate seeing those people in prison, and they're so sad about it. However, this does not contradict necessarily the decision that the ruling that was issued 1 year ago. So it is in between those trends that the legal mechanism has certain inconsistencies, and this is where we need to ensure that the other party won't gain an extra inch of ground. We always need to remember what's the battle we're fighting, and we should organize ourselves in this case. The same happened to Ambrosius' case. It's not a case of violence, but it is a case that is decisive in terms of hate speech in Greece. And we know that there was a division in the state mechanism, and then the second instance, Ambrosius was convicted, and this was also confirmed by the Supreme Court. The same happened in the case of Zach. Now, in the case of Zach, we have the hearing. This has started. We have 6 defendants, 4 policemen and 2 civilians, who are being under trial for deadly bodily harm. And we also have another part of the same case, because this is another arm of the same case. This is in a previous stage. This has to do with the other policemen who were present during the arrest, as well as the cab rescuer, and we all saw the way in which he acted. So when it comes to those people, there is a specific criminal proceedings that are still ongoing. We are waiting for the final decision so that a court ruling will be issued, and see whether they will go to trial either for deadly bodily harm, for which the policemen are under investigation, or the the felony-like exposure for which the cover rescue is being investigated, and we'll see how things will turn out. We will see that there was a prosecutor's proposal, and according to that, they were asking for this case to go on file on the basis of those defendants without having those people being referred, without the extra persons being referred to trial. And this prosecutor's proposal was undone. Okay, it's not a legal term, but we want even lay people to understand. This is not undone, and then the prosecutor, and we appealed to the prosecutor, and they said that the preliminary proceedings is practically not complete because they did not have a specific orientation towards investigating the liability of those persons, so they were asking for specific investigation acts to be carried out in order to establish whether those people should be brought at court or not. No. Now, I think that it's important to look into these divided opinions of the Greek justice, see those different stances. It's not that the legal mechanism is single-sided. We shouldn't look into that in that way, because the way in which we perceive or look into this legal system also delimitates the way in which we respond and interact with that, what we ask for, etc., and what we claim. So I believe that our request should be standing and firm. No one will take steps back. No one will ask from the Greek justice to be a clause, a safe clause for guaranteeing the health and the safety of the civilians. We want this justice to provide lawful protection to all people, regardless of their characteristics. And it is on this basis that we want to move forward. And in conclusion, I would like to say that Zach died the way he died because the people who treated him that way thought that he was nothing. He was no one. No one, and no one will have an interest in finding out what happens, so we can go and have a blast. The only option for this family and the entire society is for them to resort to justice and to exercise pressure in order for the justice to operate in the way it should. Be the natural judge, advocating for every people so that everyone can resort to it without having to resort to other solutions or being just a passive listener and recipient of any type of violence. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Cleo. I have been thinking that apart from the fact that we have a street work program for homeless people downtown, and we understand what you have been saying, that people there are some people that we tend to believe that no one will search for them, will look out for them. And now we have some efforts, and we try to organize ourselves more quickly. There is an observatory for the trial. We have been searching for the video. Just by reflecting on those facts, I cannot help but asking myself that we should be doing those things forever. This is a mechanism, of course, that will never stop doing those things. Only with pressure we can move forward. What has happened during the Golden Dawn trial, from the observatory until the plaintiff's lawyers, etc., are a pilot for all those trials, and this trial has given us a positive worldview that and this is also important. We know that we keep having difficulties but now we have some positive parameters. I totally agree with you, and I agree that this is a pilot trial. This is why we have used the Golden Dawn trial to our report, and to use it here at the panel in order to combine it with other trials which are not directly connected to the Golden Dawn trial. I hope that we can come back later. Now I would like to give the floor to Mrs. Yota Masouridou. This mention to the pilot trial was a very good thing. I want Yota to share the details about the Sakir case. We have understood the importance of using every legal means that we have in our toolkit, so to say, even if it seems futile. For example, when you went to the European Court of Human Rights. However, this case helped us with a lot of things, not only with the Golden Dawn trial, but also to prove that this was an organized violent crime with those specific characteristics. Because I don't want to take time from you, I want to give you the floor. Yota, hello everyone. Thank you very much for this invitation. I think that this event is very important. I just want to say that this case, the Sakir case, is not only a case that I have been the lawyer, but it's also a personal, let's say, effort. We have undertaken it in 2009 in order to help the rights of the migrants and refugees. We are a voluntary group of lawyers that came together in order to help refugees and migrants with issues that they have in Greece. This was an attack with a knife by a group of people with batons and crowbars. Happened in Attica Square in August 2009, and the victim has been knifed near the heart, so he had a very severe bodily harms, and then he was transported by an ambulance to Evangelismos Hospital. So the state authorities did not do anything at all. So only the hospital, of course, helped him. His fellow people, the Afghans, informed us. So we went to Evangelismos Hospital in order to visit him. This was something really hard for me to see. It was very cruel. The person could not understand what has been happening. There is so now this decision, but 2 or 3 days later, we went back to the hospital in order to see how he was going. He had left the hospital, and we couldn't locate him. We kept searching for him. We kept searching for people, and so we understand that he is kept in a cell. And when he was hospitalized, when he went out of the hospital, they made him wear the same blood-stained shirt that he was wearing during the attack. He was kept in a prison cell in inhumane conditions that, among others, Greece has been convicted by the European Court of Human Rights, and he was dressed with the same blood-stained t-shirt. And he was kept in a full cell full of people. So next to him there is another person who has been trying to communicate with us. We understand that he wants to say something with us. He was a witness to the case, and he was also kept at prison. He was interrogated. He found 2 people. The police also prosecuted them because he was found with very different names, and so he was accused for 4 things, and the 4th was for illegally coming to the country. So this person was kept for the whole night, and he was interrogated and given a lot of investigation, and this is where the European Court of Human Rights focused, in the way that the Greek police investigated the case. The witness has found two perpetrators, and then I would like to focus on the following. This witness case also went to the European Court of Human Rights. We also went for that case. Both cases happened in 2009, and the decision for the witness is the case Ahmad against Greece. It was issued in 2012, and we talked only about the basics regarding the issues of the migrants and regarding the conditions in the prison cells. It was not focused on the fact that he was a witness at a racist attack case. In 2012, even if we have given that dimension, the court did not focus on that. The Sakir case was issued later in 2016. So from 2012 to 2016, we had a lot of changes. Golden Dawn was in the parliament, and we had homicides with which Golden Dawn was linked. Therefore, the climate was different, the setting was different. So the real difference between the witness case and Sakir case had been the following: that in the Sakir case, the same court led the way, opened the way for naming Golden Dawn as a criminal group. We're not talking about groups that kept operating in the city of Athens. We're talking also about the police department. When we went to the police department in order to visit our clients, within the police department, we had people, citizens, threatening us, asking us how we went to the police department. They have been attacking us, even if they knew why we were there. And so we were treated in such a bad way, and the policemen did nothing at all. Our answer was that we fought as lawyers, and we did a demonstration at the police department, and we kept supporting our clients in these cases. So this was a very painful experience, because back then there was no light at the end of the tunnel, and justice came later on. And I think that for the victims never experienced justice, because when the decisions have such a long delay, the life of those victims was not affected by that decision, and they did not experience justice at all. However, I want to say that I have communicated with a witness when the Golden Dawn trial ended, and I would like to say to you that he was crying with tears of joy, and he said that this is something worth fighting. This was good for them, and this is good mentioning. And he said that even my burden and my suffering was worthwhile. And let me say that Ahmad Enaport was a minor. He was a child that stood in front of the police in 2009, and he was investigated for all night, and he kept saying, no, those two people are the attackers. This is very important. I think that we should support all those people who fight that darkness and they bring the light. Thank you very much.
Γιώτα, σε ευχαριστούμε πάρα πολύ, και επειδή δεν έχει τύχει να συνεργαστούμε πολύ, σε ευχαριστώ και εγώ προσωπικά για την...
Thank you very much, and I would like to congratulate you for all your work. I believe that this is very important, something that showed us the way on how to deal with other issues, and I would like to give the floor to Thanasis. I don't know whether he has addressed his technical issues. This is very important because we know that there's also an emotional burden in this case. And I remember Thanasis who said that apart from the victims, this is also the story of various witnesses, heroic witnesses who chose not to shut their drapes, not to look the other way, not to get lost in the crowd, to stand up and support the victims' testimonies. Now, Thanasis, can you hear us? No. Again, no. Can you hear me? Yes. Very good. So, we are there, we are live. Okay. First of all, I must say that I'm so pleased that I listened to Yota. It has been a ray of light and hope and optimism, what she said. Her communication with this young man and the fact that he felt that justice was allocated. Now, when it comes to migrants, this decision, this conviction regarding the Golden Dawn has been a new breath of life. This is a victory for them. It's not just the opportunity of walking around the city without being afraid that they might be attacked by those gangs. This is also a victory for all the complaints that have been filed. So it's a great pleasure listening to Jota talking about that. I would like to say that we have a very good legal nerds, legal geeks panel here, and we're being listened by lawyers and other colleagues who fight this anti-fascist, anti-racist battle. I would like to share my experience from the legal fights we have fought. Because of what we're discussing now, and because in the previous panel you talked about the far-right extremism, here we give emphasis on the legal strategy. And I would like to start by saying that the legal fights we are fighting in this panel are legal fights that have to do with not just prohibiting from far-right extremists or far-right fascist formations to speak up, and nor are we deny their right or refuse their right to organize themselves into parties. It has to do with the persecution of those criminal and punishable actions committed in the form of organized fascist party members. Of course, we have the case of Zach when we talk about racism at its finest. And to come to my part, this is indicative of what happens when this racism is political. And this is the case of Golden Dawn. We talk about a specific political aspect. We have those gangs, those battalions, and they express themselves politically under the form of a so-called political party, but we talk about a criminal organization, a militia type. Another technical glitch? Okay, so I feel that we need to have a clear mind towards that. When we talk about punishable acts, we need to resort to justice. We resort to the courts in order for them to punish those people and those acts. On the basis of our experience from the last decade, we need undoubtedly to pursue this way. From my point of view, every time a fascist attack victim asks me, should we do that? Will I be safer? Will it be safer for me if I resort to justice? Well, I believe that by all means, no matter the perspective you look into that, yes, it's clear that we need to do that for punishment, for safety reasons. Victims are safer when they have gone public, when they have exerted all legal remedies and means, when they have raised claims and when they pursue justice. And I don't know whether one might wonder whether this makes civil society more passive. Maybe this demobilizes the fascist movement and the various other activists who go against those movements. No, of course not. That's my answer to that question. When these specific criminal proceedings and those legal means are accompanied by an effort to disseminate across the society and raise awareness among the society, then of course not, this is not discouraged. This is a sort of incentive, a motive in order to highlight and showcase those incidents of racist violence. This means that things are not simplified, meaning that, okay, if we go to court and we do something else, this something else will be effective. There are cases where the things did not go at court. things did not go as planned, and those cases were lost. And of course, there were other cases where if they didn't try to involve the civil society and the citizens, and that's how they lost their social societal aspect. We need to combine what Antonio Selna said before. This image that we saw outside the Court of Appeals in October last year, where the verdict against Golden Dawn was issued, I believe that this is a picture that we need to hold on to. So institutions, what do they do and how do they operate? Well, they don't operate within our stadium, no. Institutions are, let's say, hard to move, they are not flexible, they have a hard time identifying cases of racist violence, they have a hard time determining whether it is an incident of racist violence, etc. It's very difficult even today to persuade judges that we do have such cases in the Greek society. Some people believe it's a conspiracy, some people believe that Greeks are racists, and if it is determined and established that we do have a racist case, a racist violence case, then they might feel that there's a defamation for the Greek citizens. So this is something that inspires the entire judges body, the prosecutors, etc. But this is not the case. The case is that we truly need to exert this pressure, so that we need to have society send a clear message that this type of behavior will not be tolerated. Victories, are they definitive? They happen once and that's all for good? No, of course not. We have, in the case of Golden Dawn, a very important victory, a victory of paramount importance, because now we find ourselves at an entirely different level regarding the determination of fascist criminal activity. We saw that over the past decade, and I listened to Gorifalea from RVRN, and of course Eleni Taku is to be acknowledged and be given credit for this particular case in the network. I know that this effort to document this racist violence has been very important. Today we also have a court ruling saying the things that have been saying for the past 10 years, and everyone said that we were crazy. The Greek state said that no, this is not the case, there are no racist crimes in Greece. So it's very important that we have won this battle. Those are the trenches that we will use for other fights in the future. And my last point, something that I also mentioned in another meeting that we held when we brainstormed with Patrick and others, or when we were discussing about what has happened in Greece, when we talked about all the actions against Golden Dawn. It is very important for the victims to speak up. It's very important for the victims to have a name, an identity, to go public, to have the society realize that there are people who have a name, who are parents, who are children, who have suffered this violence and who are claiming justice, and the victims should not be let alone. We cannot have the victims being left alone to bear this burden, a burden against fascism and racism. We need a people's nest, a safety nest, and HumanRights360 has done an excellent job. They have been organizing this event. They have played a key role in highlighting all those cases, in giving a voice to the victims. And since we saw the sketches in the video at the beginning of this panel, we saw how amazing this work was, with this mapping of the racist violence incidents all around Athens. And those designers gave a tangible form, a tangible image of those things. And the people who visited the exhibition, the people who bought those books, and I believe that that's the way to go when we feel alone, even when we feel like we're living in a difficult place. Right now we're trying to tackle illegal pushbacks. Those things happen systematically, against the refugees and migrants, and I believe that they feel like we felt back in 2010, 2011, and I would like to tell them not to bear with us. It's a long fight, but it is a fight where we need to persevere. We need to capitalize on the legal means and tools that we have available, and of course we need to mobilize the society. That's all. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Thanasis. I have asked permission from the rest of the panel to ask you 2 questions for you, just to say that this story with pushback is really relevant and is what we have been thinking here at the office when we draft the reports, that it is the same thing. We don't report, we don't recognize, therefore this is not existent. And this is, let's say, a vicious circle. And this is a repetition of 2009 with the racist crimes. I'm afraid that we might lose you again. I want to ask you 2 questions. The first question is, what is happening with the Court of Appeals, if you want to inform us. And the second question, a comment, because we have heard about the problematic role of the police, if you want to comment shortly on Nikos Abanis. This is, I don't know if you can do that. And before giving you the floor, when it comes to the black map of racist violence, I would like to give the credit to Mrs. Alexandropoulou and the Rosa Luxemburg institution, which helped us during this effort. So you have the floor before losing you, and then we will come back to the rest of the panel. When Electra has told me that there is this idea, I have said, oh my God, what a folly. But because of Electra and because of you, I had, let's say, a trust that this thing may go on. And thank God this is now a wonderful thing that began the battle against violence and opened it to the public. Thank you for the question for the Court of Appeals. We haven't finished. We have not with racist and fascism, which is an ongoing battle and phenomena at large that are born within today's society, but we haven't finished the trial, we haven't finished the battle. There is a second court, the Court of Appeals. This is a very meaningful court because it will hear the case from the beginning. We hope that this will not last so long. We know that the leaders are at prison, so they would not want this court to last very long. So this court will its date will be announced after the drafting of the decision. Within the next days or the next months, we will have the decision printed, which means that within the first months of 2021, we will have the date for the Court of Appeals. This is something that is coming. This hearing is in front of us and we should not forget it. The second, when it comes to the police, it is evident, in my opinion, that police is a perpetrator of racist crimes, as it was proved by the Racist Violence Recording Network, but it is also a mechanism that in various points has contributed due to its inaction to such crimes. The Nikos Abanis case, allow me to say, since I am the lawyer of the family, is such a case of a crime of police violence that should be investigated. We should also investigate the racist motive, because I am not surprised by the fact that 2 policemen shot without being legal, because their policemen lives were not at risk. 38 bullets allows us to understand that there was a racist motivation. And we know that the policemen knew about the ethnic characteristics of the people in the car. So the existence of a crime which is done with 38 bullets allows us to understand that there is hate, there is violence, and which needs to be explained. And this is why we have asked to investigate the existence of a racist motive. Eleni knows the case, of course, and Kostis Papaioannou knows the case. I don't know if he is still here with us. And everyone who has worked on the issue of the racist movement, we have asked for the implementation of the Article 82A of the Penal Code. The state hasn't done that yet, and we will also sue them if we will not do it, and if this will not be investigated as a racist crime as well, and for the existence of racist motivation, I think that the European Court of Human Rights will be convicted, will convict Greece once again. And then Greece should wait for the convictions to come one after the other. And Greece is not doing well on that front. I'm sorry if I took a lot of time. Thank you very much, and I would like to thank the rest of the panelists for their understanding. If you would like to stay with us, please do so. I just wanted to be sure that you will have the chance to answer to some questions. Now, I will give the floor to Vasilis Kerasiotis, who is the coordinator of Highest Greece, a lawyer, and one of the persons who have worked on the Sub-4 attack case, which was characterized rather as a small pogrom, as we saw in 2011. And he will talk about everything that has been going on. And before giving the floor to him, I would like to congratulate him on the last decision on the case, the attack in the supermarket against the person who has been doing their job, and he ended up being beaten up because he asked from a Greek person to move his car from the from the parking spot for people with disabilities. The racist motivation was not included in this hearing, if I'm not wrong. So, Vasilis, if you want, you can also comment shortly on that. Thank you very much. I would like to congratulate the colleagues who worked on this case, Mr. Spiros Giannopoulos and Mr. Kounianellis. I would like to go back to those things that Garifalia reminded us. For a lot of people in Lesbos, and mainly my colleagues who work on the cases themselves, who are based in Lesbos and who have worked on all those cases, we have seen that since 2017, what has been happening now reminds us of what has been happening in 2011 in Greece. The Sub-4 attack case is a case that has been hidden, so to say. And the criminal law, instead of being protective, and we should say here that apart from any other reason that we should go to the justice, something else is that victims who are undocumented right now, which are victims or witnesses of severe bodily harm, they should receive license to stay here immediately. We have done that in some cases, and sometimes it was implemented, sometimes it was not. But right now, since we are here, I would like to mention it. We should keep saying it and repeating it. Racist attacks, what they are doing is legalizing the victim. Now, when it comes to the Sub-4 attack case, I would like to remind you some facts. The attack took place in April 2018. We had a death at the Moria camp of an Afghan refugee. And after that, we had in the beginning 100 and then more people, 200 people in Sub-4 in order to demonstrate peacefully. the mayor has been asking them, Mr. Galinos, to go away, and the shop owners, and they kept saying, no, we will not go away, and that they will clean the square, and they will want to demonstrate peacefully. They are not doing anything wrong. They are just a peaceful demonstration. At the end, what really happened was that after some days, according to the citizens, the society of Mytilene was disturbed, so to say, by this demonstration. Some people decided, which is rather funny if you ask me, they have decided at the day of getting up the flag, at the time of raising the flag, some fans of football clubs gathered there in order to be ready for fight, so to say. Everything happened publicly in social media, and therefore a very huge attack with stones, with batons, with various types of weapons started. This was an attack, a pogrom-like attack, if I may say so, where 30 people have been injured. And after that racist attack, which took place publicly in front of the police and in front of the public prosecutors, which have been in the building above and have been looking down on how they would be able to evacuate the square. And this attack happened right in front of their eyes. There were no people were not led. No one was led to the prison. No one was arrested by the police, and this case is still in the dark. Later on, with the help of organizations and members of the civil society, we found the people who are responsible, and the crime was reported to the police, and some people were identified, and some months later this case was sent to the public prosecutor, who accused them for severe bodily harm and arson with with risk of life for the people, and other several crimes. Nevertheless, from 2019 till today, and this is what is strange at this case, no one came to the court, no one was invited to the court, to the public prosecutor, in order to give their witness. The way that the public prosecutor of first instance, who was there at the day of the attack, and the way that he chose to evacuate the square, as it happened with Sakir, was the use of criminal law. They did not arrest everyone, but they were sued because they have occupied a public, let's say, space, a law which dates back to the Metaxa government, and the public prosecutors sat there in order to find a way to send those people away from the square, and years later this case was sent to the court, and Eli Priona and another colleague were the plaintiff's lawyers, and they were people, they were of course left free. But those people who have been peacefully demonstrated, they have been accused and they have been brought at the court. We cannot talk about the support of the victims or for giving them licenses to stay in Greece. And right now, all those years later, we cannot find a way to find witnesses in order to give the statement.
Another issue we're faced with in this case, and memos have been submitted to the National Racist Council and the Racism and Intolerance Council, and I believe this has also happened in the framework of Secure case. The network had filed a report about all those delays in this Foursquare case. And in general, I see that this case is not moving forward. Another important point I'd like to make is this. Misdemeanors are subject to statutes of limitation at some point. This is a major point of concern, and we will see at the trial level what the response by the prosecutor will be. And from that point on, the whole response and the management of a very important case on behalf of the authorities, or rather their non-management or non-response, has generated a sense of impunity. We see that the society becomes more fascist-like. This has taken other dimensions. This is manifested in the form of other attacks. Some of those are perpetrators in the Safo case. And why not? Why should they do that? Because they did not face any charges in the previous case. So we see that there is this impunity. I think they have also been involved in other racist attacks, and from what I know, there is no such thing as a racism-related conviction for a punishable act that was committed in Mytilene Island. This case included, because we know that the racist motive was not included in the indictment there. And Thanasis said before that's very difficult to include that as well. But after that, and during the fires at Moria, we also had those people from the militia who went against the refugees, and in general we see that there is a propensity of the society to become more fascist, and this further deteriorates. Now, when it comes to local cases, or cases of local interest as they are called, sometimes the judges try to deal with them in the right way. I dare say after so many years, the result, at least for the island of Mytilene, is not the one that we would have expected or anticipated, and we know that this has not led to peace in the society. We do have some exacerbations with various other incidents and attacks, and there is a sense of insecurity of the people there. And of course, we haven't seen any progress in terms of the progress of the case of Sakir, whether we will have a conviction on the grounds of racist violence because time goes by. Justice has not been adjudicated, so it is clear that there is an extreme caseload. If there are no witnesses, those cases won't stand at court. And since Tina is joining us here in the panel, maybe it would be useful to listen from her what happens at the level of the UN Declaration of CRD, what happens there. That's all I had to say. Thank you very much. Thank you, Vasilis. Thank you, because that's an excellent pass to Tina. Before giving her the floor, I would like to ask for the understanding of the participants. We have various problems, various technical glitches, poor internet connection, etc., so we can't ask for your understanding. I'm grouping questions and comments for later, so if you want to post any other questions, please do that. However, I would like to share a comment with you. A comment saying that the mechanism does not make any mistakes. It only has programmed or unprogrammed successes. That's why we need to be constantly present. So this is important because it accentuates the fact that we need to be vigilant. Now, Tina, you have the floor. You're a member of the UN Committee on the Elimination of Racial Discrimination. And I believe that all the aspects of the RVRN and all the representatives of RVRN are there. She's the person that inspired us to author and implement this racist violence recording aspect. Okay, so thank you very much. Tina, you have the floor. Thank you for this invitation. I would like to welcome you from the University of Cyprus. We have had representatives from the University of Cyprus in both panels. I'm sorry that I did not attend the first part of the event. I hope they won't repeat things that have already been mentioned. And I believe that today, apart from the good and nice things you mentioned about me, Eleni, I'm here in my previous capacities, my other capacities. Well, I believe it's up to me to summarize, let's say, in a more structured way, the things that we have heard about all the cases that were brought up by the previous speakers. I would like to start with two clarifications regarding definitions. To my point of view, far-right extremist groups, well, they have a specific definition to my point of view, as it was a definition of the UN General Assembly. They convicted the neo-Nazi-like and racist-like practice of extremist groups, including violence incidents with racist motive, members of against specific minority populations. And those acts fall under the scope of Article 4 of the UN Declaration for the Elimination of Racial Discrimination. And today, member states convict every such act. We shouldn't forget that everything that has to do with the superiority of a race or a nation or specific racial characteristics, color, or organizations that try to justify or promote racial hatred and every form of discrimination. And I believe it would be useful to say that legal strategies don't have to do with the support of those victims at court. Of course, this is one aspect, but we also have public advocacy by human rights advocates and supporters in favor of the elimination of racial discrimination and in favor of the victims. So, when it comes to the legal strategy, we have complex issues, and those complex issues discourage people most of the times. And we know that those things don't come up clearly from the beginning. This calls for the collaboration of many actors. We know that. It takes too many actors in order to establish that. Extremist groups capitalize on those gaps in the law, those gaps in the practical implementation of the law, and in order for those gaps to be identified and highlighted, they need to be determined, they need to be understood, they need to be established. And when we talk about racist violence crimes, because I'm an expert on that, I will try to show the following. Usually, we talk about relatively new crimes regarding their standardization. Those are crimes that, when combined with other extremist groups, along with the femicides, have come to overthrow the traditional application of human rights in the context of criminal law. I would like to remind you that even human rights advocates have been familiar with the support of more or less vulnerable defendants against the potential breach of the fair trial clause. Racist violence and hate speech introduce a new aspect to this balance, because we have the human rights principles that have infiltrated the criminal law in order to boost the support and the protection of the victim. In that way, they revisit and they review the criminal proceedings as a procedure. And we know that criminal justice has had a specific perspective of the criminal proceedings. In other words, in order to convict someone on grounds of a racist violence offense that is initiated by a racist organization, this should be applied in a way that will allow for the investigation of this racist incentive and motive. And this process, as we remember from the previous cases, and without having the victim being able to support and defend their case at that stage, we asked questions towards the fairness of the trial as well as the effectiveness of this protection, issues that were brought forward for the first time in public discourse. Another example, in order to establish the organized nature of an organization, its investigation needs to happen in a way that will allow for the gathering collection of evidence. And later on, this evidence will prove at court that there is this aspect of criminal organization. So, the documentation and the updating of the authorities by members of the RVRN regarding those cases has made the authorities familiar with those questions, the prejudice markers and indices, things that emerge from the human rights arena and the human rights law, the discrimination law. And the authorities were not familiar with that in the past, that they were unable to detect those things and identify them. This traditional function of the criminal law is mirrored in the culture of the stakeholders of the criminal law. So we have victims of extremist groups, crimes. They are the most vulnerable of the vulnerable, people who are invisible in terms of the rule of law, either due to their status or things that render their ability to resort to justice inapplicable. That happened in the case of Sakir, and this also supported the advocacy by the network and other stakeholders with regards to the amendment of this criminal clause, as well as the practice regarding the investigation of those crimes in order for the racist motive to be included as an alleged motive in order to use the terminology, the jargon of the Hellenic justice by the police when they present the case to the prosecutor. And the documentation of this note of the dark figure of the criminal case, in combination with efforts made by the victims' lawyers and the devotion of human rights advocates in order to adopt a protection status for those victims, and we need to prevent them from being deported. This helped more the Greek law that rendered it possible for those victims to resort to justice. And I would avoid saying that, in fact, this is what legitimizes the victims. No, I believe that in all rules of law, not only in Greece, everywhere, to my point of view, this falls within the effort of supporting the victims. And ever since we have seen that pieces of law have been approved and voted, and of course we shouldn't neglect that. However, we know in the past that we have seen such cases, the complaints and reports to the police have increased. That's the way they confronted the judges and people who were invisible until today sought justice. And this led to a shift from the residence permit, even in ad hoc cases, on a case-by-case scenario. So there was a shift from the residence permit to access to justice and combating racist crimes. It is on the same rationale, the creation of the special department that we saw, the special offices of public prosecutors in Greece, has been an institutional response that increased the visibility of racist violence crimes before the judges and the courts. It further facilitated the communication of human rights advocates with important stakeholders, the criminal proceedings, and we must admit that it did improve in most of the cases, at least the management, the treatment of the victims. Okay, so this is a summary that was very short because I didn't have more time, because we know that there are other aspects of the other witnesses, and I believe that the previous interventions highlight the fact that there are more to that. People who supported people in the critical cases of the Greek justice, and I would like to invite you to think of all the different people who are involved, the lawyers who identified those gaps, who conveyed and shared this message to other human rights advocates, and they in their turn created the right legal stance towards the competent authorities. And we also need to say that we, legal experts, wouldn't have made it if it wasn't for our colleagues from psychosocial support. And to my point of view, understanding the needs of the victim cannot start at the entrance of the police station or the prosecutor's office or the courthouse. And it's on the basis that we need to realize that we need an effective application of the law for the support of criminal organization victims. And before concluding, I would like to talk about another aspect of the criminal organizations. I'm talking about the actions that lead to an abuse of the freedom of expression, etc. To my point of view, over the past decade, we have seen that there is a broad understanding of the following fact: that extremist organizations capitalize on those gaps in the legislation, as well as the limits and the borders of the freedoms and the rights that we enjoy in a well-performing society. Even for human rights advocates, the fact that they need to explore those limits of the various rights, right to express yourself, right to speak up, in collaboration with social media, leads a framework within which the injury, the harm caused to the victims remains undetermined, and they are unprotected with the well-known impact. I'm talking about the interconnection of hate speech and racist violences. And now, as you know, there are specific studies studies not on the basis of the experience, but studies based on evidence recording those things. The European Court, in two recent decisions, tried to explore the impact of hate speech on the members of the Jewish community and the Roma community, and they tried to provide clarifications criteria because hate speech that has these features might have a negative impact on the privacy and the private life of any member of those targeted minority communities. So apart from the criminal law, for which we have been discussing in this panel, the mechanisms that are established in the law against discrimination and before the competent authorities or the competent courts, they might play a key role in the protection of hate speech victims. So we do realize that this is still a field that needs to be further explored regarding how we can battle and combat those xenophobic and racist manifestations. To conclude with, I believe that every court ruling, having listened to the colleagues, of course, my thought is the following. Every court, of course, does justice to the victim. It reinforces support to the institution, inspires human rights advocates. But we all know that supporting the rule of law, supporting democracy that not simply tolerate but is reinforced thanks to diversity, is an ongoing process that unites people, does not discriminate people. And I believe that legal strategy can be configured or is worth being configured at a more local level, meaning that we have numerous variables that need to be considered. Thank you very much.
Εμείς ευχαριστούμε πάρα πολύ. Νομίζω...
Thank you very much. Correct me if I'm wrong, because I'm the only person who's not a lawyer at this panel, that the first time that the Greek state worked in that way was the case of Taleb, if I'm not wrong, the Egyptian worker in Salamina who was found dead and tortured. If I remember well, this crime was so violent that even the Greek state back then said that we should not continue as usual. And this is a very important legacy for giving access to the victims to the justice, giving them access to justice. And even if Fallah has said, as Fallah have said to the previous panel, this is still a great issue, and which is still underreported, because the police is not doing their job right. This is still an issue when it comes to the victims and their mistrust and the fact that they don't want to report the crimes to the authorities and to the police. I don't want if you want to make a comment on that. I am also gathering some comments that they just came. there are various comments on how important is this trial of Zach, and there is a question if this is linked to organized groups, because we have heard a lot of rumors. Maybe this trial is not as publicized as it should have. So I don't know if you want to make a comment on that, Cleo. Jota, I have a question from the colleague, which is a question that I keep listening. If we know where Sakir is and if we know that he is doing fine, maybe this is a kind of, I don't know, romantic question, but even if I, who haven't met that person, and a lot of people want to know if he's doing well. So, and I have two more questions. The one is addressed to Vasilis. Apart from the racist attacks, Vasily, and the fact that there is a sense of impunity, especially in Lesbos, there is also an issue with the organizations and the people who work there. The situation is, there is a, I don't know, a situation of terror. And a question for Tina or Thanasi. When it comes to student discriminations, I think that in the case of Nikos Ampanis, and the question that we have, and all the various facts that we keep listening, there is a document recording of three persons that are Gypsy, that are Roma. So we already start with the facts before having anything else. There is a racial profiling from the police. Now I will give the floor to Thanasi if his connection is good, and then you each have 3 minutes in order to for you to comment on the questions. Thanasi, can you hear us? Yes, we can hear you. Racial profiling is evident in my opinion, and this happened from the first moment, even if policemen denied it. And even if they said that they don't do that and they didn't manage to see the characteristics of the passengers, because the main issue is that they are minors. They could not use weapons. Nevertheless, we have the recordings, and we can, from the first moment, understand that this was a method of racial profiling. This is a modernization of the police. Right now, I have to say that I have been reading a lot of texts from New York Times or by other media in the United States of how the US police has been describing the car as a weapon, and on how the description of the car as a weapon allows them to use violence and to use their weapons. So we have racist cases such as the one of George Floyd, which have been happening every day at the United States. They are an everyday occurrence. So we have the import of that know-how to the police. There was a front page at the newspaper Parapolitica during this weekend that Theodorikapos went to the USA and has been bringing back know-how by the USA police. I am saying that because we will find those issues in our everyday lives. Racial profiling and the mention by the policeman and by the Minister of Civil Protection that police will not stop punish the crime in groups of high criminality, which means that they have been targeting a group which is not the job of the state. The issues of personality are secondary in a trial, a criminal trial, and now we don't have only the fact that this is a criminal act, but we are targeting group population with very specific characteristics. We know that those populations are vulnerable. Either they are foreigners, they are poor people, they are Romas, they are migrants or refugees. So we will have to tackle this increasing, let's say, different behavior of the Greek state and the police. So we have been importing know-how from the US. Wow, interesting times in front of us. Cleo, would you like to comment on that issue? This is my favorite issue, because for 10 years that I have been working on human rights, they have been saying the same things and nothing changes there. Nothing changes really there. I have started by saying that the mechanism of justice has been moving forward. In my opinion, when it comes to the police, this is a solid institution, a solid body. And a short comment on the Sabanis case. We have this incident, this case. A 20-year-old young person has been killed, and the Ministry of Civil Protection says that maybe the hazardous driving will have higher crimes and higher penalties. I don't know. What are we saying about? This is really crazy. The fact that we are changing the issue, we're changing the discussion, allows us to understand what the government is thinking and what a part of the population is also thinking. When it comes to the question on the trial of Zach, and if I believe that there is an organized group behind it, no, in my opinion, there is no organized group behind this case, and the evidence of the case law do not allow us to say something like that. I think that this crime that has been happened in 2 times, first from the citizens and later on by the policemen, this is the best example of what we say, the standardization of evil. We have a social fascism which was and this person was targeted as an easy victim, and they believed that they could be violenced against him, and judging by their behavior, we can understand that they believe that nothing bad will ever happen to them. Yes, Cleo, you're right, of course. I don't know if this is saddest or more sad or less sad. And the fact that this is not something organized, but it was, we have seen that the cab rescuer, the persons who were there to help, acted in such a way, I don't know what we can say. And dozens of citizens who have been watching this scene like watching TV, like watching Netflix. And the only good thing that came out of this is the fact that we had the videos that were shot by the witnesses with their mobile phones, because we wouldn't even have any accused person at all. We would have said that this was an accident. Thank you very much, Jota. Can I add something, please? On the Sambanis case, because it is related to the police. Apart from what my colleague said, I think that we have to say that, especially at this case, there is a coverage on the behavior of the police by the justice system. This also happened at Zach case and the case of Sub 4 Square. If our system of justice and if our judges could intervene immediately, then we wouldn't have this situation. Unfortunately, since the police is not controlled, we will have cases like that in the future. Now, when it comes to Sakir, unfortunately, we lost contact very quickly. We have contact with Ahmadi, the witness. It is worth saying the following, and I would like to thank you for the question. we have said to the European Court of Human Rights that we have lost contact to the victim, as we should. Nevertheless, the court continues to hear the case. The Greek government appealed a lot of times. You could not understand how much work we had during this hearing. In legal arguments that you don't have analyzers, you don't have anything at all. And in having a Greek text, and therefore we said that the European Court of Human Rights should hear the case because the issues are very serious. They concern the society at large and the principles of democracy, and this is why we asked for the hearing to continue. So the European Court of Human Rights accepted that, and they issued the decision. They could say that since you have lost contact with Sakir, we will stop the case and we will put it on the record. This is something very crucial and very important, and it shows how, on an international level, the people understood the events. This has happened back in 2014 when we gave the last replies to the appeals, and the decision was issued 2 years later. Unfortunately, I don't have contact with Sakir. Thank you very much, Giota. I don't know.
In the way in which we describe the Sabanis case, I see more questions coming up shortly. I'd like to give the floor to Vasilis Kerasiotis now. I think the question has to do with the impact on civil society organization. Well, yes. Well, I think I talked about it in my intervention. However, I'd like to say that from my point of view, we see a causal relation between all these lack of action and reluctance to action, as well as the poorly kept balance on behalf of the police, because we know that we have such a case and there are other cases that just accumulate. We talk about minor cases that might have with animal theft, and we have square cases that don't move forward. And let's say that we also have the RCI case that will be heard on November 11th. This is a case law that happened after the sub-4 square attack case. Anyway, we also have the chilling effect. And what do I mean by that? I mean that at some point we find ourselves and our colleagues in a state where they are afraid. The fascists or the aggressors have achieved their goal. Their goal has been successful because there's no response from the state. It is clear that the results will not be favorable in general. What can I say? That we have reached a point that we have been involved in cases that are not directly relevant to refugees, but to NGO members in order to support that. Well, if Efidus, my colleague, was here, she would have been able to share more about it. But in general, yes, there is a problem. I don't know whether we need to extend the 82A article to everyone. And if those criminal proceedings had applied from the beginning against the perpetrators of those felonies, rather than having the ex officio charges brought against the aggressors of the Safo Square attack, well, we know that this has not been punishable, and clearly this led to the opposite outcome. Even the aggressor sees that 3 or 4 or 5 years later there is no impact whatsoever, no repercussion, no consequence. You do realize that this is an impunity case has an impact on the island. Yes, it's true. It's institutional impunity, like I said before. Dina, I would like to give the floor to you, but before that I would also like to add another question that is addressed to you. You talked about public advocacy as a legal strategy, and the people who are advocates of things, how can you comment on the fact that the public attorney asked from the head of the region of Samos Island to respond to that. And what did they do when they went to the mountains in order to meet a group of newcomers? And yes, they went to Samos to helping newcomers. Yes, they are facing charges. I don't know whether you're able to make a comment on that. I would like to give you the floor for anything else you would like to say, and then we will conclude with a last comment by the representative of Social Change Initiative. Well, I don't know about this incident, so I cannot comment on that, but we do know that when there are institutions that need to follow specific rules, so this is something that we have always known. Those are the rules that all human rights advocates have been trying, myself included, of course, have been trying to implement. And I believe that in general terms, because I cannot make a comment on the Saban's case either, it's obvious. However, I would like to make two general comments. It's more of a reminder. The first comment has to do with the fact that I'm afraid the case law of the European Court for Human Rights, in the case of homicides by a policeman, is based on the sincere perspective, that's the phrase that has been used, of the police officer who's in danger. Well, we know that it's quite vague, and I do hope that we'll have the opportunity to elaborate that. So this reminds me of the average physician. In order not to ask for excellence, in order not to prevent excellence, we are running at risk. We're running the same risk with police officers if they had the sincere conviction that they were in danger. The second point is the following. Those of us who are familiar with the case law and the opinions of the special organs on racial discrimination of CRD, we all know that police violence victims are members of a vulnerable community. And I believe that this renders automatically the need to explore the possibility of a racist motive. That's something that the competent authorities know, and I believe that this is an argument, a well-established argument, and the Greek authorities cannot ignore or overlook that. I would like to remind you that it's all about having that explored. We know that there's a presumption of innocence, and to my point of view, in such a case, the racist motive, well, actually, to put it in other words, usually we're looking for racist motive when there is a subjective element. But in this case, I believe that everything we heard before indicates that investigation should not be something that needs to be discussed by the authorities. I'm talking about all countries, all rules of law. It needs to be investigated, explored, identified. If not, okay, it's excluded. If yes, it is included in the case law. In any case, I believe that, and that's a general comment, I said that before, legal strategy, if we look back, we take a distance. I'm talking about the attacks from the Golden Dawn, etc. Now we have taken a distance, and we are more cool-headed. Now, we forget that we need to have this complex part being segmented, because we know that we have the positive obligations on behalf of the authorities, and a competent and effective protection medium is not effective if in practice this is slow and does not adjudicate, or if it does not acknowledge the right of access to justice to racist violence victims. Those things are being investigated by the courts of human rights. Thank you. Thank you very much, Tina, for this aspect, and we are on time. First of all, I would like to thank Leo, Yota, Dina, Vasilis, and Thanasis, I hope that he's still with us, for their interventions. They have all been to the point. I'd like to conclude by giving the floor to Avila from the Social Change Initiative. They coordinated this initiative, and I'd like her to share some thoughts, and then we will conclude with a short video. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. And on behalf of the Social Change Initiative team, thank you for allowing us to listen to what has been a very rich discussion. Because we are based in Belfast in Northern Ireland, we are not unaware of the difficulties encountering politically motivated violence. And from the discussion, I certainly have drawn a number of thoughts that are very applicable to other societies. First of all, the multi-layered approach that was taken, that includes the sort of building the evidence base that we heard from the Racist Violence Recording Network, and drawing out the trends from this data, the importance of clarity of analysis, both in terms of the nature of the far right, but also in terms of the nature of racist motivation and hate speech, and indeed analysis of systemic sympathies for far right. The importance of the alliance building, the collaboration across so many organizations in different sectors, and indeed the whole area of fake news and communications, including about how the mass media reacts. But equally important, indeed, at core importance, is the importance that we've just heard from the last panel in terms of strategic litigation. And a lot of us outside Greece know about the trial in terms of Golden Dawn, which was such an amazing achievement over many years. And the fact that a legal judgment, named Golden Dawn's violent action as criminal, just legitimizes it and punctures their political aspirations. And for me, that highlights the importance of maintaining an independent judiciary that we see under attack in a number of European countries at the moment, and even to an extent within the United Kingdom, but also the broader legal strategy, which has included so many other related cases that perhaps outside Greece are not as well known. And I think really what came across as an outsider was just the level of commitment from all the contributors, but particularly from the legal teams, and the level of determination, and the fact that victims who are often marginalized, dehumanized, scapegoated, actually will be named and will be made visible, and the importance of raising public consciousness around the impact on victims. And the other point, which again, coming from Northern Ireland, rang bells, was using the international and the national as a puncture movement with the European Court of Human Rights, and that also being very important. And I was really glad to hear the comment of the US getting in touch to actually look at the whole issue of racial profiling, because one of the things, as my colleague Porrick said at the very beginning, that the Social Change Initiative feels is really important, is activism and strategic litigation people exchanging that sort of information, rather than us all trying to reinvent the wheel all the time. And just to end, to thank you all very much, to thank you both for your work, but also for your taking the time to share your work with people from outside Greece. And just to say that we hope to have, SCI is working to organize a seminar, a webinar that will actually bring together on that international basis, HumanRights360, but also with people from America and from other countries who are working on these issues. Because as the point was made, I think in our first panel, we do need to maintain preventative planning rather than all the time be in reactive mode with regard to racist violence and indeed to fascism. And I think in doing that its solidarity is really important. So thank you all very much.
Thank you, Avila. Σε ευχαριστούμε πολύ.
Thank you very much, Avila. We are 3 minutes after 7, so I will close this panel. Thank you very much to everyone. I would like to thank the panelists especially, and I would like to draw the conclusion for one more time that we can walk alone, but we should strike all together. I would like to stress the importance of being all together. So I would like to remind you, tomorrow there is the trial of Zach Kostopoulos. We have the Court of Appeals of the Golden Dawn. We want to move forward together. I would like to thank you very much for being here today.